Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Accountants Club podcast. I'm joined today by Carl Reeder, who I'm sure doesn't need that much of an introduction to you all. But Carl, last time we met was on a very hot day in London a few months back. So I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself. But the background for Carl, for those of you who don't know, Carl has been an entrepreneur for many years. He is a TV and radio broadcaster. He's a keynote speaker, multiple award-winning and published author. Carl, do you want to maybe give everybody a little bit more about your background for those who don't know?
Yeah, no problem, Jim. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And it was almost like I wrote that intro myself, wasn't it? But look, Jim, I think to share the story from day dot, however, I'm not going to go back to the midwife holding me up by my feet. I was an accidental accountant. So I left school at the age of 15 and decided for some reason I wanted to be a YTS hairdresser, which ages me horrifically. So that was the youth training scheme, the old form of apprenticeships. As you can see, wasn't cut out for it. And I had to go back to school, do my GCSEs and find a job pretty quickly. So I fell into the world of accountancy, as I said, by accident. So unlike most people who don't necessarily dream of being an accountant, but certainly have a plan of being an accountant, whether it's through studying accountancy at A level or for a degree, or whether it's through proactively applying for internships. I actually just applied for every job in the newspaper, and it just so happened I was underweight for the army, but actually got offered 2 jobs in accountancy firms. Right. So fast forward a bit, at the age of about 26, 27, I started the buyout of the firm that I was at. So when I joined the firm, it was about 18 members. And I'm guessing, but I don't know the numbers at the time, probably, I don't know, maybe 500K turnover. I'd scaled it up to about $1 million by that point, and that was primarily through just going out, meeting people and doing everything I could to avoid the real world of accountancy, because I realized that actually being ADHD, which I was diagnosed as an adult, and accountancy, being sat in a room adding up numbers, the two don't go too well together. But I really enjoyed going out, meeting business owners, speaking to them, and asking them why they do things and so on. So anyway, we'd got to a point where I'd scaled it to a point. I'd started the buyout process, and then from there, that completed in about 2010. So that took a little while to finish. But I was determined to make a business that didn't rely on me. I started the process of stepping away from the firm, I guess back in 2012, which kind of kicked off a fork in my journey, Jim. So we had the accountancy firm where I was trying to build a leadership team, trying to build a board that can work without me, trying to build processes and systems. But also I started to use some of the free time that I was getting to create content for smaller businesses. So the kind of stuff that I did there was very active on social media reasonably early, built up to about 170,000 followers by creating videos, by posting memes and all sorts of stuff in between. Yeah. And along that way, I realized that there was no voice for small business in the UK. You know, we have the likes of the CBI and the FSB who have certain vested interests, but don't necessarily represent the person on the ground. We have the media, which talks about FTSE 100 and big business, but there's actually no voice for the small business at the time. Yeah. I started speaking to journalists, and as Jim said, got involved in the media. Within a month, I was in 5 national papers, and before long, I'd been in every national newspaper apart from Sunday Sport, and been on pretty much all of the TV channels, radio, and so on. So that was kind of the small business that was going on one side, whilst the accounting firm was continuing to develop, because this whole arc of making a firm that works without you is a whole lot easier said than done. The reality when you try to do it is that the journey goes in waves, and I was in and out of a business as team members joined and left and systems broke and so on. But in 2019, I believe it was, or 2018, I actually had the opportunity to finally retire to non-exec chairman. Got involved in football, all kinds of crazy stuff then. So yeah, Jim, I guess that's the potted history of Carl.
Quite a journey. So Carl, I think there's a million ways we could go, and I know I've only got you for a short period of time, but One of the things I want to maybe just spend a little bit of time on is the accountants that are listening to the practice. They're probably going to be thinking right now, there's an energy crisis, there's a cost of living crisis. That's not only impacting households, it's impacting their clients, but also their businesses as well. So you've kind of bought and sold businesses, you've built businesses, and fascinated by the concept of kind of making yourself redundant and putting systems down into organizations. If you were in the position of the people running practices today, what would you be thinking about in terms of shoring up your own business, the practice, and also being able to support your clients in the coming months, given all the challenges that they're now facing?
Got it. So I think there's two very different questions there, and the two can potentially come into conflict at times. Let me first of all start with the accounting firm. Whilst I retired in 2019, during COVID, like everyone else, I worked more hours than I'd ever worked in my life. So I'm actually closer to the accounting firm today than I have been in the last 10 years.
Right.
And what I can tell you is that a lot of the noise of what we're supposed to be feeling and we're supposed to be doing within our firms is actually not tying up with what I'm seeing. So the current state of play for accounting firms, as I see it, talent shortage is no longer the issue that it was 6 to 12 months ago.
Yeah.
It was horrific, but now we've gone back to the early COVID days of people might want to leave, but they're quite scared of leaving because they don't know what's around the corner from an employee perspective. So the talent market is nowhere near as competitive as it was. However, our small business clients have got some very real fears about their livelihoods going forwards. And I'll bring in some anecdotal stories about that in a moment. The landscape for accountants is probably more compliance heavy than it has been for some time. We've been sold this story of advisory, but actually we all know MTD's around the corner. We all know that software isn't necessarily going to do it all from cradle to grave as it might be perceived. And we all know that actually there's going to be lots of practitioners perhaps leaving the profession and having this as the final straw and deciding that they go off and live off of their pension fund and sell their firm. So there's a whole host of things happening, which means it's a very mixed environment for accountants. So for accountancy practices, what do I see? I see that the banks are nowhere near as supportive of professional firms as they were before, but that goes actually across not just professional firms, that goes across all businesses. So the banks have got a bit of a wobble. The second issue that I see is that there is a lot of noise that's perhaps not necessarily beneficial for the profession as a whole. And there's a trend of slating accountants, which isn't necessarily the way that we should all be going. But the problem with that is we've observed a trend, and I know some of the firms I speak to have observed a trend of boomerang clients, where they've realised actually the grass isn't greener. They've realised that the sales script that they've had delivered, or whatever method was used to sign them up, actually there hasn't been the service fulfillment at the end. Clients are more open to churn at the moment, and I think customer experience is far more important than necessarily the technical nuances of what you do. That might go against the grain of some people listening to this. I get that, but make sure that your technical experts and your customer delivery experts are two separate people, because the two don't generally match up. So that's the landscape for accountants. But on the whole, I think accountants are in a relatively good place, provided they've got the digital tools and the inclination to grasp MTD. It's just yet another hiccup in the way that IR35 and everything that's gone before it was. I think back to when I started in practice, Jim, 1997, as a young 16-year-old. And I remember IR35 came in, the change from SC60s to CIS came in. There's a couple of other bits that came in. And I remember the partners panicking like mad that these things were going to decimate the practice. And then on the flip side, they were saying, but we thought this about self-assessment. And look how that panned out. Self-assessment is probably the fundamental service that accountants deliver now. Yeah. And every bit of work leads towards the small business owner's tax return. So that just puts it all into a bit of context when we worry about the likes of MTD. For small businesses, though, I really do fear the worst. I think there's a lot to come. So We feared during COVID that there would be a lot of doors being closed. We feared that a lot of people would just pack up and have enough. And I think we saw a bit of that, but we certainly haven't seen it all. So I spoke earlier about the fact that the banks aren't lending. Access to finance is the biggest challenge that businesses are facing right now. The banks have not acted admirably with CBILS. And I think that's partly a knee-jerk reaction because they had to act in a certain way for bounce-back loans. They had to just give them without checks, so they've decided to make sure their CBILS book and their RLS books are watertight. Generally, I've seen that there was a big chasm between those who were suitable for a bounce-back loan, businesses realistically up to about 500K turnover, a bounce-back loan should have supported them, up to about 3 million. That chasm of small businesses, which is actually quite a healthy chunk, they weren't able to speak to their bank manager to get a CBILS originally. And I guess the defining factor of who was able to get CBILS versus who wasn't was whoever had the mobile number for their bank manager. If you weren't big enough or noisy enough to have your mobile number of your bank manager, you struggled to get finance during COVID. And I think that's continuing. So that's a real challenge. I think that there's clearly a change in consumer confidence. We can see that in the used car market, where it's all static now, whereas it was inflating and going quite out of control. We can see that in the watch market. Certainly if you look at the trends of Rolexes, for example, 2020, they were on a curve upwards, and then through 2020, 2021, they shot up. And I'm talking double prices for some models. And that's starting to chip away now. We look at the property market, that's slowing down. People aren't spending money. They're being more considered about what they do. So I think that's a whole host of factors that we can see. And then we've got the very big one that's on everyone's lips at the moment, which is the energy prices. First things first, we need to remember, and I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, the energy cap doesn't apply to small businesses. It only applies to consumers. However, prices are still going up massively. And I'm hearing of small businesses being quoted 10 times what they were quoted before. So the impact of that is not only on the business itself, clearly pubs, takeaways, anyone who's reliant on a lot of energy, think of swimming pools, think of gyms and so on, they're being impacted by that, but their customers are being impacted by that as well. So there's a real double whammy of customers looking to be a little bit more restrained with what they spend, but also business owners having to face that difficult choice of putting their prices up or not putting food on the table. So I don't want to fearmonger, Jim, I really don't. But it's a horrific time for small businesses, and not helped, of course, by the current political chasm that we've got and the lack of leadership, which will hopefully be resolved in the next week or so with a small business friendly approach.
I probably share some of your concerns, or all of your concerns, Carl. To be honest, I think the real crunch will come, and I think this is partly a hangover from COVID, but I think the real crunch will come because people are still recovering. People took on debt that they didn't want to be able to survive. So they whether they be loans or bounce back loans or whatever it might be, they're carrying that debt now. They're carrying costs that they wouldn't otherwise have. Next question, Carl. Boss It. So I can see the plaque or the canvas in the background. That's been a great, I listened to that on audio. Great book, thoroughly recommend it. What does it mean to you as a concept?
So really interesting question. I wrote the book pre-COVID. So I finished up the manuscript on the 24th of February. That's my publisher's deadline. And I actually feel embarrassed to share this, Jim, but within my foreword, I was talking about how the world is such an uncertain place. I was talking about the geopolitical uncertainty between the US and North Korea. I don't know if you can cast your minds back to that strange time pre-COVID, but we were on the verge of a very real world war involving nuclear weapons and so on. We had two maniacs who both wanted to press the big red button. I was looking out my garden as I was writing the manuscript, and I could see the devastation caused by Storm Ciara and Storm Dennis. So all of this stuff was going on, and the world was a really dodgy place. And at that time, it felt like things were uncertain. And by the way, there's this little unknown virus in China. But don't worry about that, because we've got all these pressing issues we need to worry about first. How wrong was I? And the reason I share that, Jim, was because fast forward to the point that I had to review the manuscript in July. Oh my God. When I looked at that manuscript and I saw references to offices and I saw references to face-to-face networking and all of this stuff, all of a sudden was alien. And it was really interesting because I learned a couple of things through the review process of Boss It rather than the writing of it. So the writing was just sharing the stuff that I know and I'd advised on and so on. But during the review of it, what I realized was that actually the principles don't just apply to startup businesses. They apply to all businesses, first of all, because let's be honest, the first couple of months after COVID, we were all startups again. We were all learning new tools, new ways of working, new ways of managing, new ways of leading. So the tools within the book are the Dream Plan, Do, Review, and the fundamental pillars of a business and so on. They all applied equally to existing businesses as new businesses. But secondly, the processes and the ability to boss it, in my eyes, isn't a business methodology. It's actually a personal methodology. It's the same process that you go through if you're looking to lose weight or to start exercising or so on. So that's what bossing it means to me. It's about taking control more than anything. It's about taking control of whatever's on your lap. And let's be honest, over the last couple of years, we've had a whole heap of stuff that was far outside our control, far outside of our imagination, and making the best of what you've got.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it's a great book. There's a lot of valuable lessons. I learned a lot of stuff from it. I relearned stuff from it. So I'm looking forward to the next one as well, because I know you're a busy guy and you're looking to get more out there.
And I think there's a lot of benefit from that approach, not necessarily the book, but the approach for businesses and individuals. So I mentioned the anecdotal story earlier, and I do feel I want to share this because I think it shows the gravity of the situation we're in and the fine balance and how accountants can help. I was speaking to two people just last week, Jim. So the first was the CEO of a listed company, quite a major company, and they were worried not just for their franchisees, but the CEO was worried about his own personal finances.
Right.
Okay. And that is a very big thing, because we know that whatever goes on up here in the leaders of a business is translated to the performance of the business.
Yeah.
So that was huge for me to hear that the CEO of a listed company was worried about the energy cap and what it's going to mean to his personal budget. The second one, an ex-board member of NatWest RBS Group. So again, should be very high net worth, etc., etc. Absolutely panicking, not just because of the energy crisis, but also the interest rate and the fact that he's coming off of his fixed rate. So I think that whilst it's been, the media narrative has been framed, but this will impact the worse off, and it will absolutely will disproportionately impact those on prepaid meters and so on. It's impacting everyone bar the true 1%, the 0.0001%.
Yeah.
So we might think we can ride through this, but our clients are going to be feeling some real pain.
Yeah, no, I think it's on everybody's mind, Carl. What would be, if you were to be able to give sort of 3 or 4 pieces of advice for people to kind of consider over the next 12, 18, 24 months, just to help with some of this, what sort of things would you advise people to do?
Okay, so the very first thing is a process called fear setting. And what I mean by fear setting is, rather than setting your goals, set out your fears. Write them down on paper, write down what the worst is that can happen, write down the or score the risk of it happening, so out of 10, and the impact of it happening. Because the reality is the fears that keep us up at night actually are nowhere near as bad as we think they are. We need to look at what's the worst that can happen. If our businesses go into liquidation and we all become personally bankrupt, actually, what's the worst that can happen from that? Generally speaking, you will keep your home, you will keep the shirt on your back, you will still have food on the table, etc., etc. We are very lucky to be in a privileged society where there are safety nets to protect us. So fear setting is really important for your own sanity. Secondly, don't be afraid to pull the plug. I think that it should always be on the table. Never be too proud to make the difficult decisions, whether that is unfortunately making team members redundant, whether that's cutting down the size of your premises. Look, guess what? We've had to do both at D&T over the years. We've dropped an office. We've had to let team members go. It's not what we've wanted to do, but we've had to do it, and we've had to make that rational choice. Don't let ego get in the way of making those big calls that can actually protect you. Thirdly, make sure that once you've got your fears absolutely defined and you've put your ego in the bin, make sure that you've got a very clear picture of where you are and where you're going. And sometimes simplest is best. You don't need a three-way projection from a complicated cash flow forecasting tool. Simply write down what's your monthly income as a business, what are your monthly expenses, are you in the black or the red? Really obvious, but you'll be staggered the amount of businesses who float along blind to this stuff. Do it personally as well. With all of the costs that are going up, just double check that little spreadsheet, back of a fact packet calculation, where you're going, black or the red. And then once you've done those three things, so you've set out what the fears are and you've overcome the worst of the fears, you realize that you're not going to be locked up in prison by making a small mistake. Once you've checked out of your ego and actually start to look at things pragmatically, you've then got the data in front of you. That leads us naturally on to the final thing, which is to review your business carefully and go through that data without your ego, understanding what the fears are, but be objective what you do. You can never grow a business by cutting costs. However, at times like this, you do need to trim off the fat. You need to really question whether you need those team members, whether you need this fluffy memberships that you've got and so on. We've racked up a load of subscriptions and so on over the years. Now's the time to look at those, but also then make sure that you include sufficient budget for keeping on top of things, for marketing, promotion, for innovation. Make sure that you actually bake those in, because we are going to have a churn. We're going to lose clients. We talk about the average client life being 10 years, and that's a rule of thumb in profession. What we tend to forget is that's 10% of our clients. And it's really obvious, and we tend to forget it. We tend to think that it's a 10-year client life, but I don't lose clients. That's supplemented by the issue that a lot of new practices have, but they've not got to the stage of losing clients yet, unless it's on bad terms. As we hit difficult times, as we've already got an underlying churn in practice, plus we've got the stress and tension of the practice, as well as the difficult times business owners facing, the likelihood is churn is going to go up, and you need to have a plan to be able to replace that, because if you don't replace it, the treadmill just gets faster and faster.
That's great advice, Carl. Thank you very much. And look, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got other things to go on to. So thanks again for taking the time to talk to me. If people want to learn a little bit more about what you do or follow you on social media, how can they do that?
Okay, so best bet is look at the website, carlreader.com, or my social is @carlreader on all the platforms. Please do feel free to reach out. I post a lot of nonsense on there, but hopefully there are some golden nuggets that you can take away for yourself and your business. And if you've got any questions, again, just drop me a message. I don't bite.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carl, and have a great rest of your day.
Fantastic. Cheers, Jim.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Bye.